looks like it's just going to be me and Dave, but that's okay. That's why we record these, so we can make them available later on. People can watch them when it's convenient. So today, Dave and I are going to just talk a little bit. We've had some brief conversations over the past few days. This idea has sort of been percolating for me for a while, and probably even back several months, as we're seeing just some of all of the craziness that's going on in the world, and how that has created some additional stress for churches and for pastors and church leaders. And but so that's been in the back of my mind for a while. But probably what really sparked the idea for today, particularly, I shared back a month ago when we had our annual meeting, that I had received a text message from a pastor in the association, and he asked me if I could preach for a couple of Sundays, and I told him that I could, and he said, and you'll probably be hearing from the deacons about helping with an interim pastor. And so I sent him a message back and said, "Where are you headed?" And my first thought was that he had possibly been called to another church. And he shared with me that he was just burned out, and that he was just going to be stepping down and trying to kind of regroup and reevaluate and consider whether he would move back into the pastorate at some point in the future or not. But right now he just needed a break. And though that's the first one of somebody that I knew well and I was close to that I got that from, I'm hearing a lot of stories about people that that would be a really easy step for them. And so I've kind of tossed that idea to Dave a few days ago about that might be something that we could talk about. Obviously, I know I haven't. I don't think Dave has done any deep research on anything like that right now, but anecdotally, and some of the things we've heard, and even over the past few days, Dave and I were at the Baptist General Convention of Texas meeting in Galveston, and there were even some things that were mentioned, whether it was during sermons or reports or whatever, that for me even supported the idea that this was probably worthwhile. And we may address some things more fully later on and do some more specific research. But right now, just the idea of, what's going on, what are some of the anecdotal things that we've heard, and just some observations as we've thought about, what are some things that it seems like churches and pastors are really struggling with right now? How can we help? How can we not only help encourage pastors in some self-care before they get to that point, but what are some things in the association? So we didn't really plan out the whole conversation here, so we're just gonna chat a little bit. So I've kind of given my introduction, and Dave, what are some things you've observed, maybe in your circles that are a little different than mine, even though we certainly have a lot of overlap, but some things that maybe in conversations you've had that really indicate the level of stress that a lot of pastors are dealing with right now?
I think that pastoring is a lot like anything else, in that you get in a rhythm, right? There are things that you do that are anticipated, things that you do that are fully expected, are going to be the same from week to week, from month to month. even from year to year. And so you sort of get into a groove, you sort of get into a pattern and a rhythm. And anytime that's disrupted, anytime any single part of that is disrupted, it's going to bring stress, right? So if it's a change in finance, that's going to bring a stress. If it's if you're moving locations, that's going to be a stress. If there's a change in personnel and you're losing volunteers, if there's a change in schedule, any one of those by themselves is going to be a stressor. You throw all of those in at one single time, and it's absolutely it can be catastrophic. So those are the things that we haven't seen all of those here at First Nocona, but in my circle, people that I know, all of those have been the case, right? So there have been financial stresses, giving has gone down. There have been location moves. We actually experienced that. We met out, it was about a year ago. We met outside for a while, and then we met in our gym for a while. Then we've been meeting back in our auditorium for some time, but just the, moving from place to place setup, lowered attendance, people who left, and maybe didn't come back or didn't make it clear why they weren't there. Loss of volunteers, some folks who just felt like, even people who for a while had been contemplating stepping out of a volunteer role, that when this happened, it just made sense for them that after that shutdown not to come back. And so I think all of those have really served to amp up the level of stress and uncertainty, in next. Those are the places that I've seen the difficulty that can then lead to burnout potential.
Yeah. I've described this to a lot of different people. I know I've mentioned it to you before, but there just seems to have been over the last couple of years, it's almost this perfect storm of whether it's, obviously things related to the pandemic, and most of what you described there were adjustments that had to be made, and then just the political climate. And I don't remember a time in my life that politics didn't kind of affect things in the church, but I've not seen it like I've seen over the past few years. And I think the overlap of the pandemic responses as well as some of the political things, because I know that some of the things, and you experienced it as a pastor, lots of pastors experienced it, hearing from people in the congregation, well, if you make everybody wear a mask, I'm not coming. Somebody else says, if you don't make everybody wear a mask, I'm not coming. And then when the controversy over the vaccines, various other kind of things. Some people thinking that you're overreacting, some people thinking you're underreacting.
Yeah.
And I think probably every pastor has felt it, but I know that within our association, at least, the vast majority of our pastors pastor single staff churches, and so they're put in a position to have to make decisions without having a team around them to help give input. And so I think in some ways we may have guys that are feeling more isolated even than they were before.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think we have, and this goes back decades, if not longer, we've kind of created unhealthy models of ministry, what the task and the demands of ministry looks like, where it almost puts the pastor, especially in a single staff context, it puts the pastor in the role of producer and the church in the role of consumer.
Yeah.
rather than the pastor or pastors or leadership in the role of equiper and the church in the role of partner. And I think that's exacerbated the situation as well, because there's almost this expectation in the minds of a lot of pastors that all of this falls on me, and now I have to do all of these things to keep it from going off the rails. There's a very real, palpable sense of that, even in my heart, and I know better. There's that almost natural impulse to say, I've got to fix this, I've got to do this, and I think that pressure on pastors is really what's leading to burnout, whether it's pandemic related or political, cultural issues. Is I've all of this keeping everything on the tracks is all up to me. And so we've been very intentional in our decision making, that everything goes through sort of layers of leadership. So I have had to make very few decisions overall, and no big decisions all by myself, because I have sought out other voices. I'm sure that in a lot of those, the church or our leadership may have been fine to say, you just make the decision and we'll do whatever you think is right. That's not healthy for me, and that's not healthy for them. And so I have intentionally brought people into that conversation, whether it's I'm our lead pastor, we have 2 lay pastors, whether it's that group of 3, broadening it out, including our deacons. If it has to do with children's ministry, including our children's ministry coordinator and some folks involved in that ministry. If it has to do with student ministry, talking with some parents. So just trying to include as many people as we can in that decision-making process, so that it doesn't all come on, rest on my shoulders, or on the shoulders of any one person, that we share this burden together. And that's been, I think, one of the things that has probably kept me from burnout in this is that model of just shared ministry.
Yeah. And, something that obviously I know this about you, and a lot of people in our association, if they've been around a little bit, they know you and they know this about you. But the fact you've been at your church a long time, and so there is a level of trust that's built up. You're about to celebrate 20 years at your church, and also the structure that you have in place with the lay pastors and those kind of things. You weren't throwing that together in the midst of the pandemic. Those are some things that you already had in place ahead of time. And so the idea of being intentional and strategic with the way that you were looking at the church over the past several years has formed a little bit of protection in that time of intensity.
Absolutely.
And so I think about our pastors that don't have the tenure, and haven't been, and this is not a criticism, it's just they have not been in a place of thinking strategically about structure and about direction and all that kind of stuff, the way that you have been intentionally approaching that for the last several years. And so I'm thinking of guys that, it seemed like this was all hitting them at one time. And now they're thinking, as you said, I got to fix this, because they didn't already have something in place. So I guess I'm thinking some about, and kind of the way my mind has gone on this is that even though normal has not returned, nor do I think the normal from before is ever going to. Right. But it seems like we're in a time where there are still challenges, but we're able to start thinking about, thinking about things and going forward. I've been trying to share with pastors and churches that this is a great time to do a kind of reset and reevaluate. And the thing that I fear is that even those who are open to that idea will think in terms of renewed strategy and activity, but not in terms of how are we structured, and how do we be sure that we're developing the kind of support. And I think it was attributed to Peter Drucker, said that the culture eats strategy for breakfast. Yeah. And we're not thinking about the culture of the church, maybe sometimes because we're too wrapped up in the culture that's going on outside and trying to avoid that, but we're not thinking about the systems and the culture and the relationships and the support systems that we're developing within the congregation, and in the case of the association, and partnership and kingdom partnership with others that are close to us.
Yeah, I think speaking to that, just that idea of culture. Another thing that I've seen during the last year and a half, coming up on 2 years, I guess, is the complexity of the structure and the complexity of the culture. I think it helped that we're fairly streamlined in what we do. And that's so asking the question, what is necessary for a church to be a healthy, faithful, biblical, New Testament church? What's necessary? What is required? Because again, one of those kind of unhealthy models is, I think we've worked to sort of fill up our calendar with things that are good, or they can be good, and they keep us busy, but it's unsustainable in times of crisis. And so, you think about in Acts chapter 2, attending day by day, attending the temple together, breaking bread in their homes, receiving their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God, having favor with all the people, right? Together, had all things in common. Like those are the bedrocks. So yeah, if you get to a point where that's what you're doing, even if you have to temporarily suspend extra programs and ministries and those kind of things, if you're doing the things that the New Testament says that a church does, that should be good enough. And so, that was one thing that we constantly went back over the last year and a half and looked at with our leadership is, are we doing the things that we need to do? Are we doing the things that are necessary? Are we preaching the word? Are we praying? Are we serving one another? Are we finding ways to serve our community? Just the bottom line, foundational tasks of ministry. And if so, all right, then we're good, right? We don't have to try to keep all those plates spinning in order to be faithful. Should God move in such a way that we're able to get back to that? Great. Then maybe we take some of those things on. But I think another thing that this period of time has caused us to evaluate is what we do, our schedule, our calendar. Are there things that we do because we've just always done them, but don't really help us fulfill our mission and our purpose as a church? And maybe some of those, you lay those aside and you just don't pick them back up. you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think with the, with the time of a reset and looking, a lot of times we're thinking in terms of what else do we need to do? And we're not thinking about something that maybe it's time to stop doing it, or maybe it's time to do it differently.
Yeah.
So it's a question, and I have used this tool a lot, and and you've been in the room when I've used the tool before, but the 4 helpful lists,
Yeah.
where you say, what's working, what's right, all that. Well, yeah, that's something we need to optimize. What's not working? Well, that may be something that we need to delete. What's confused? We need clarity on it. What's missing? What do we need to add? And the thing that I've seen so many times is that sometimes the things that are wrong are not so much that they're wrong as that they're not clear, or they're missing an important piece. But sometimes they're things that are not necessarily wrong. They're just things that are not working anymore.
Yeah.
And that's not a reflection on whether they were right when we started doing them. But the reality is we're just in a different place.
Yeah.
And there are different scenarios. And one of the things I heard several years ago, but it really stuck with me, is we need to remember that everything we say yes to is going to require no to something else. Because there are only a certain number of hours in the day, certain number of days of the week, those kind of things. So every time we say yes to something new, we don't have the option of adding more hours to the day or adding more days to the week. So we've got to think about, what is this adding this new thing going to require me to say no to, and which one of these is the most important and most strategic. And so sometimes we need to say no because there is a more important yes.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think something else you mentioned too, about while things were kind of shut down, you had people that were probably considering stepping away anyway, and just took that as a time. And that's one of the things that I really think happened in a lot of ways, whether it's with volunteers, and sometimes it's just people attending, is that I think they were on the way out the door, and the current situation sped it up, but it really didn't cause their departure.
Yeah.
And I know that pastors bear that burden and sometimes take on a sense of responsibility for that maybe is not realistic. The story that I told at the beginning of the pastor who stepped down because of burnout, I have since had some conversations with some of the leaders of that church. They love him. They think he's a great pastor. They're praying that he will, be able to get back into the pastorate at some point. But their observation was, whether it was accurate or not, was that the people who were involved had dropped off enough after this, and that they really felt like that part of that, his situation, was his discouragement over that. And whether that's accurate or not, it's not something that he mentioned to me in our conversation. But I just think it's there. You feel like, if I were a better pastor, I could have headed this off. I was that way for my 20 years as a pastor. I'm still that way. When a church in the association, decides to pull back or whatever, the first person I want to point my finger at is me.
Yeah.
And if I had been doing my job better, they would have seen the value of it or whatever. So I think that's something that we've really got to be aware of. The definition of responsibility, somebody gave me one time, the definition of responsibility is the ability to respond. So That's doesn't right. That doesn't mean that I'm in charge and I've got to take everything on. It means that I need to know how to respond appropriately to each situation. And sometimes the best response I can do is to wish somebody well.
Yeah.
Um, and
And that kind of,
oh,
goes into a second area. So that the first area is sort of the task, the demands of ministry, and sort of discerning what things are necessary, what things do I have to do, what things can I share, what things can we do together. But then that idea of encouragement sort of leads into a second, I think maybe area that could help prevent burnout, or at least delay that, and that's relational
mhm.
health, and having people around you, whether they are people in your church, other leaders in your church, other pastors, associational staff and leadership, people that can be an encouragement to you, that can walk with you through that. Because you mentioned isolation,
Mhm.
and I think that's a big deal. Guys, especially who maybe aren't in regular contact or networks where they can really connect with other pastors and other guys who are going through the same thing, and connect to resources that can help them. It is a lonely, lonely place. Nobody else understands what I'm going through. I'm trying to juggle all these balls myself, and I can't do it. And I think that speeds up that process of burnout when we don't have those people around us. And I'm extremely fortunate to have several different layers of that. I've got some of the pastors in our association that I know that I'm tight with, that I could pick up the phone at a moment's notice and say, hey, what do you think about this? Give me your feedback on this. The Dangerous Pastors guys, occasionally we'll throw
Mhm.
questions at one another and say, help me think through this. Our local ministerial alliance, and granted, we don't all necessarily share the same doctrinal convictions, or those kind of things, but still, they're pastors and they know what
Mhm.
it's like to bear that burden. And so to be able to sit down with them and walk through some of those things. And then I'm even a member of another group of pastors that we meet once a quarter and just have lunch together, and talk about ministry and talk about struggles and stresses and those kind of things. And so all three of those have been incredibly important. And so if you happen to be a pastor and are watching this and you feel isolated, reach out to me, reach out to Gerry, reach out to other folks. If there are other pastors in your town, other pastors in our association, if it's somebody that you went to seminary with, if it's a pastor you grew up with, I mean, just find
Mm.
somebody who can help walk with you through that and encourage you, pull you back off the ledge.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I was. It's a good time to kind of shift into. You've talked about some of the causes and circumstances and all of that, but in thinking in terms of and I realize that everybody doesn't view the same way, but self-care,
Mm,
and I'm not talking about being self-centered and
right.
not aware of anybody else, but the illustration I've heard used a lot of times is you're on the airplane, and the cabin pressure changes and the oxygen mask drops, and they tell you put your mask on first.
Yeah.
And a lot of times our context, because we understand that part of our calling is to serve, uh, because that's the model that Jesus gave us. But part of that sometimes means that we take an unbiblical response to say everything else comes before taking care of me, making sure that I am bringing the best of me to those situations. And so you mentioned the relational component there, and I think especially for pastors, I think there are other relational pieces that are important as well. But I really do what you mentioned about pastors having relationships, friendships, mutually supportive kind of things with other pastors, because I mean, I know everybody's under stress, everybody's tired, but anybody who thinks that it's the same for every person in the church that it is for the pastor, it's obviously they have not been a pastor, because I mean they're just things that only somebody that's walked in that can understand. But in addition to the relational component, what are some things that you would think of, maybe, your top two or three things regarding these are really important self-care ideas, strategies, concepts?
One of them is, and I don't know, I'm not adept to know how you cultivate these things. I just know if you have it or you don't, and that's just a sense of self-awareness. Mm-hmm. Being aware enough of your own patterns of thinking and patterns of behavior that if you start thinking in ways that maybe you haven't thought before, or acting in ways that are unnatural for you to act, mm-hmm. or certainly things that are unhealthy or destructive for you, that something in you goes, wait a second, this isn't right. I need to address this. And so self-awareness is so important that you don't get, halfway down the hole before you realize something is wrong. So just recognizing some of those patterns, and even, and this sort of ties in with the relational part too, having people around you who can recognize those things in you. Family can do that. My wife is going to be the first person who recognizes if I'm acting, thinking, speaking, responding in ways that are not normal for me. And so family can be that. And if you can give your family the freedom to say, hey, tell me if you see something in me that is concerning to you, or have some friends, have some people, that church members that really care about you. And I'm not talking about the people that are just going to be critical of you. Right. I'm talking about people who love you and have your best interest at heart, who can say, hey, I'm noticing these things and I'm worried about you. Are you okay? And so self-awareness, giving other people permission to do that for you. I think both of those things can be helpful, noticing those warning signs. And then I also think habits of sort of daily and weekly rhythms. So for instance, I sort of fell into a pattern that I didn't have before the pandemic hit, but has really become very beneficial and very comfortable for me, where I get up before anybody else in the house. I make myself a cup of coffee, which I never was a coffee drinker. So it's crazy. COVID got me drinking coffee. I'll make myself a cup of coffee, and I'll just sit in the recliner by myself, maybe read some scripture, maybe pray, and just sort of take it easy up until, everybody else is getting up. But I don't even plan typically to be in the office until about 10 o'clock. And I mean, some people may not like that. Well, you need to be in the office when it's, when the 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, whatever. The rhythm that has worked well for me is to do the things that I need to do in the morning. Don't, just sort of ease into the day, and then hit it hard at 10 o'clock, and then go. And especially if I have something in the evening, maybe take some time off earlier in the afternoon. So just developing those rhythms where you can have some time for rest, reflection, introspection. I know that word Sabbath is typically used on a weekly schedule, right? You need a weekly Sabbath, but I've taken that and almost even applied it to a day. Like, I need some Sabbath time during the day to just sort of unplug, step back, and rest. Not be lazy, but actively rest in the Lord, and be energized and be filled up by Him. And that's what gets me through the rest of the day. So finding those daily rhythms, and then also certainly weekly rhythms. If you've got days off, take days off. And I know it's hard. I know there's always stuff that has to be done. But do everything that you can to protect that time for you, for your family, for your own sanity. And then I'm sure that there are other practices beyond that, whether it's monthly or yearly, retreats, those kind of things. But those two things, daily rhythms and weekly rhythms, have been incredibly helpful for me.
Yeah. My experience has been that those rhythms that are spread more out, whether it's monthly, quarterly, whatever, are actually less likely to happen if the daily and weekly ones are not happening.
Yeah.
Because, I've been there. I've been there and said, well, I got this, once a quarter or whatever thing that I'm going to take a day, and then I'm just going hard for 3 months. And that day comes and I'm too busy, or I'm too exhausted, or, whatever that is. And so I love, and rhythm is a huge word for me anyway, because I just think I think it's biblical, and I've both been in things. You talk about the rhythm of Eden and rest and work, that kind of stuff. But the physical rhythms, spiritual rhythms, the self-awareness of not only the way you respond to things, but just, my body doesn't feel right, so is there something? And I get a little uncomfortable with the idea when somebody says everything is spiritual. Well, everything has a spiritual component because we are a whole thing. But sometimes there are things that are going on in your body that you may need some treatment of some kind. You may need some medication. You may need some lifestyle choices. You may need to not eat nearly the amount of barbecue that I have eaten over the past couple of weeks. And all that is having an awareness of your body, and of your mindset, of your emotional state. And one of the things you mentioned, Sabbath, when I 2.5 years ago, I guess, was when I took sabbatical, or 3.5 years ago, actually. And what I did on that was really study. It was mainly about rest, but the reading that I did was on the concept of Sabbath and sabbatical from a biblical standpoint. And one of the things that stuck with me more than anything was a definition that some variation of this was given in several of the different books that I read. But the idea of Sabbath is not simply that you don't do something, but the idea is that part of what you're doing is resting in your trust of the Lord to provide. And what you're giving up is not so much activity. What you're giving up is the need to produce.
Oh yeah.
And you're saying in that this is not about, my life is not about what I can produce and accomplish. And so in those moments of Sabbath, you're just simply acknowledging God, who is the provider, and who loves you, and who doesn't who doesn't look at you through the eyes of how much are you accomplishing or how much are you producing.
Yeah.
Because the truth of the matter is, he doesn't need us to produce stuff. He really likes to do things through us, but he's not particularly interested in what we do for him. So that's, I think that's huge.
Well, and that kind of ties back into the first thing that we talked about, tasks of ministry, and that idea that, well, if I don't do it, it's not going to get done. And my question would be, okay, so what if it doesn't get done?
Yeah.
And maybe it needs to get done, but maybe the answer is, so what?
Yeah.
It's okay if it doesn't get done, or if it doesn't get done right now.
Yeah.
And so I think all three of these things, the task component of it, the relational component, the inward sort of spiritual care component of our own hearts, I think all of those are so intertwined, and they have so much, they impact one another.
Yeah, I was just thinking, and I've used this with a lot of people, when somebody's, indicated something they're really stressed over. So the question is, so what's the worst thing that could happen?
Yeah.
If this doesn't get done? And you can get them to imagine, what the worst thing that could happen is. And the second question is, so what's the likelihood that the worst thing that could happen is going to happen?
Yeah.
And then the third question is, well, if the worst thing that could happen does happen, how bad is that really?
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly that's exactly right.
Even, I talked to a pastor years ago who was an incredible amount of stress, and there was a lot of conflict at church, all that kind of stuff. Well, what he came up with, the worst thing that could happen was that he could get fired. And I said, how likely is that to happen? And not real likely, but it is possible. And I said, in the situation you're in, how bad would that be?
Yeah.
I mean, it could be a relief.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But we've probably about gone long enough on this, but I want to just kind of hit a few things that, from an association standpoint, what are some things we have to offer? Obviously, you've mentioned just about the connection with other pastors, and we have tools such as leading from your strengths process to help people build a healthy team, so that they're not carrying the load by themselves. We have processes such as Church Unique and God Dreams that, where somebody can say, this is a time of reset for our church. What are some things that we need to think about that may mean that we need to do a serious reset or a restructuring or a rethinking about where we're headed over the next few years. We have tools that kind of allows to evaluate the current reality of the church and see trends and other things like that. We have coaching. I mean, we have a lot of things that are things that can be helpful, or they are helpful, they are beneficial, but there are tools and relationships and things that are readily available that can help with those kind of things. And one of the things that David Hardage mentioned that I was not aware of in the BGC2 meeting this week, but about, and of course I'm certain that's limited to churches that are affiliated with BGCT, but some assistance from the state to help with pastor sabbatical. And that's something that we don't have the resources that the state convention does, but we do have some resources. And I'm actually in the process of working on some training that I'll be doing with people who are interested in being interim pastors and doing supply preaching and things like that. But I want to, because I've done this for a couple of churches in the association, have served as a sabbatical interim pastor, for 4 weeks or 6 weeks, did that for 6 weeks earlier this year in one of our churches. And I approach it from a very intentional a process of not just being a placeholder while the pastor's out, but actually working with the church to have them to consider some things, and that where it's a season of sabbatical. And I've approached some of the guys that are on our pastor supply list and things like that. Say, would you be interested if I were putting together, a training to kind of help you, if you were available to step into a church for 4 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever that would be, to say, here's some things that would be helpful for our churches. So we're kind of continuing to put that together, and could also help with some of the expenses that would be necessary. One of the things that I think churches get a little nervous about, particularly small churches, is, we got somebody coming in, pay our interim, and then we're still going to pay our pastor his full salary, and he's not going to be around for a month or whatever. Yeah. And so to be able to kind of help with that, and help the church kind of get their head around the idea that this is not simply a pastor's time away, but it's a season for all of us to kind of enter a time of rethinking and revisiting and be ready when the pastor comes back, that we're going to go together. So there are a lot of things that we already have in place, things that we're working on putting in place, and but the main thing is I don't want to hear any more of those stories that it's too late. We could figure out a way that we're connecting, so that maybe somebody doesn't decide that they've had enough and then just let us know. But hit it a little bit sooner. So anything else you think of before we wrap today? Anything you wish that I would have brought up?
I think we've hit it all pretty well. Just again to say, if anybody's watching this and finds yourself feeling like you're sort of inching closer to the edge of the cliff, reach out to me or Gerry or somebody that you know. And I mean, it may be time for you to step back. That may be part of God's plan for you. So the goal is not that we're gonna talk you into staying where you are or to continue on this path that you're on, but at least you'll have somebody. So you're not just trying to wrestle through all this on your own. You have somebody to bounce off of, and can be an encouragement to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I will, whenever I edit this and get ready to put it up on YouTube, I will put both of our email addresses in the description on there, our association email addresses, so you can reach us. You want to do that. And of course, a lot of people have our contact information, cell phone numbers, all that. Do that. The other thing, and I'll do a quick promo. We're not going to do our third Thursday meeting in December. It's just too many things going on holidays wise, but we are in January, and it won't be exactly the same, but kind of continuing on the theme. We're going to have Beverly Ross, who is the director of Wise County Christian Counseling, and we're going to have her talk from a standpoint of a professional counselor on some resources that might be available that way. But also, I've asked her, without breaking any confidentialities or anything like that, so I won't tell anybody's particular story, but are there things that currently right now that their counseling center is seeing over and over again? And the other thing too is I realized a long time ago that sometimes you get a little bit of a tool, and you get just enough to be dangerous. And so I am in favor sometimes of recognizing that somebody needs something from me that's over my head, that I'm really not qualified to deal with this. And it's something that somebody really needs some counseling on, that's more than just a, what do I do about this little decision I got to make about this or whatever, but may need to really spend some time in counseling. Is I think, I need to know that I can refer somebody to somebody who is qualified. And I think sometimes, and honestly, that could be something that contributes to stress for a pastor sometimes, is carrying the burdens for somebody else that are really more than we're equipped to do.
Yeah.
Seminary gave us a little bit of training and that kind of stuff, but not many of us really have the qualifications or the abilities to get into really deep counseling things with people. And so, that'll be one thing. So anyway, we're looking forward to that in January, and we'll send stuff out about that. So that's probably a good place to wrap up for today. Thanks, Dave, for your input, and for your input all the time is valuable. One of the best things about you being now on the association staff is that, I feel like I'm better from having your voice and in the conversations a whole lot more often. So I appreciate you that way.
I'll get a part of the conversation. So.
And I look forward to seeing you at your church on Sunday, celebrating 20 years at First Baptist Nocona. All right. Thanks.
All right. Thanks,
See
Gerry.
you later.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.